A music review of the 1969 album Hot Rats by Frank Zappa. Before we get to that awesome piece of work, let's have a quick potted history of Frank Zappa. He was born in 1940. He's an American multi-instrumentalist, musician, composer and band leader. His work characterized by non-conformity, free-form improvisation, sound experimentation and musical virtuosity. And to add to that, he's also a satire of American culture. His career spanned 30 years and he composed rock, pop, jazz fusion, orchestral and music concrete works, and produced almost all of the 60 albums in his discography. He initially came to the fore with his first band, the Mothers of Invention, and they basically came about in the very early 60s, and that's how I first came across Frank Zappa. And I'll be perfectly frank, I wasn't that impressed. I couldn't get into the satire, the comedy, and the music was far too obscure for my liking, and I only really dipped into him. I was impressed by his politics. He was very much a man who was into freedom, iconoclastic views of establishment. He was very political, and he was very humorous, described as the godfather of comedy rock, and he was a strident critic of mainstream education and organised religion, and he brought that to the concert hall. Passionate advocate for freedom of speech and the abolishing of censorship. So this man was a very important figure in American culture and American music. His parents, his mother Rosemary, was Italian extraction with some French thrown in, and his father was an immigrant from Sicily with Greek and Arab descent. So quite a mix there, a melting pot of talents, and he was the eldest of 4 children. So in 1966, Frank, with his band the Mothers of Inventions, released their debut album, Freak Out. It's a bit difficult to really describe it. A double album, and it mixed in R&B with doo-wop, musique concrete, and some experimental sound collages that captured the freak subculture of Los Angeles at that time. And he then went on the following year to release Absolutely Free, and in that album he expanded the ideas originating from Freak Out, and the arrangements become much more sophisticated, and also the comedy was added to the mix, and it became relatively successful. So we then moved on to Lumpy Gravy, which was the third offering, and that was very much an experimental piece, and it continued to baffle a lot of traditional rock fans at the time, although within Los Angeles and also in New York he grew a large following, particularly to his live shows, which were choreographed and far more than just a music concert. And so that leads us then to the album Hot Rats, which is the album that I'm going to discuss today. Well, this became a groundbreaking album in terms of the style of music. It was almost all instrumental, and in vast contrast to the previous Mothers of Inventions albums, which involved considerable amount of lyrics and comedy. It was also titled Frank Zappa as opposed to the band title, and I will review it now. Track 1 then, Peaches on Regalia. It's 3.5 minutes of jazz rock fusion, and it has some tremendously snappy rhythms. It's exotic, erotic, and representative of a set of musicians at the peak of their powers. It's described as exhilarating by critics. It fuses jazz and rock together like a glove. The arrangements are tight, inciseful, and it's got a sumptuous feel to it. It's a tremendous opener. The music, the creation of Frank Zappa and Ian Underwood mainly, with a few others, and Underwood is a major contributor to this album, and particularly this opener with piano, flute elements and sax elements. Frank is described as playing the Organus Maximus. I'm not sure what that is, but you can have a guess, I suggest. Add in his talents on lead guitar and you have an absolute gem. Of course it's instrumental, as most of the album is, except track 2, and it encompasses multiple overdubs, following the use of 16-track technology by Zappa for the first time. Track 2's Willie the Pimp. Here Captain Beefheart delivers a Delta Blues-like gruff vocal, which at times is hilarious to this blues-based song. It's an extravaganza which starts off with the Sugarcane Harris violin before Zappa's guitar takes over, and the fluidity of his style is at times riveting. And it's a match for any of the so-called guitar greats: Clapton, Page, Hendrix, Beck. FC is smooth, and he mixes in the wah-wah, and it's an extraordinary virtuoso performance. Clockwork noises and claps catch your ear early on. It's best listened to with headphones on and played loud. The drums and bass are impressive. It never bores me. The melody is the key, and it ends with Harris's violin, just as it arrived like that at the beginning. It's an absolute guitar fiesta. Track 3 is Son of Mr. Green Jeans. This was previously heard on Uncle Meat, although it was nothing really like this. It was merely just a sort of flushed out basic rhythm. Here it's a complete rhythm. It starts with a jazz band feel with horns abound on top of the rock sound. But after a couple of minutes, once again Zappa takes off with another lengthy guitar virtuoso piece. It's more spellbinding than Willie the Pimp, and the keyboards mix beautifully with the guitar licks. Frank Zappa is fast, and he enmeshes the music with the horns, and it's particularly awesome. It has more of a jazz feel than Willie the Pimp, but nevertheless, Frank solos are out of the park with excellence. It never gets boring because the rhythm section is constantly pushing for excellence, and Zappa responds in spades. The keyboards from Underwood are explosive at times, and the last few minutes are just, well, oozing full of talent. The piano intro rejoins as the track slides to a conclusion. It's truly a special piece of music. So to the opener on side 2 then. It's a short 3 minutes worth of Little Umbrellas. It's a bit like a stroll in the park with the rain tipping down. It gushes with keyboards, and the lush arrangements are a standout. It's a bit lounge jazz-like, with the peculiarity that is Zappa's trademark. The piano takes centre stage, and there's a nice flute bellowing through, just a bit like small raindrops would do. Now to track 5. This is the main event on side 2, the Gumbo Variations. It starts slowly with a very neat intro, and then the duets of guitar by Zappa and Harris's violin arrive in your ears, and it's like a concerto a little later when Underwood's sax joins the party and replaces the violins, and the guitar and sax takes over with other assorted gems. Now, then Harris rejoins the wailing party as the sax fires like a gun at you. But the sax is not Parker and it's not Coltrane. It's too radical for that comparison. And then there's a faster sequence where the guitar and sax compete side by side. It's almost like it's a competition to who can play faster, and it's extremely invigorating. And then there's the indulgent solo, which continues a la side 1. The bass is a knockout, and you need to listen to it, but it really is striking. And then on about 7 minutes, Harris on violin rejoins and takes his cue as he rolls his bow up and down frantically. There's some nice rhythm guitar from Frank at this point as he chops away at the melody, and it's brilliantly restrained considering his virtuosity on side 1, and it really does accomplish so much, with the rhythm section being so tight and robust, and for pure instrumentation, this may well be the highlight of the album. It never sounds like a jam. That's the thing that really appealed to me. And as we get on to the 12-minute mark, Frank finally can't resist, and he bludgeons his way to the front with some lead guitar work that's stylish, like a replica of the chopping lead work on side 1. And then after a brief solo, the bass and drums have their moment, and then Harris relieves them and transfixes the senses as we approach the last 2 minutes, when all hell is let loose as the avant-garde nature of jazz takes full stage, spiralling towards the crescendo, the climax, as all is spilt in sweat at the end. Final track on Pat Wright's then is It Must Be a Camel, and it arrives and its jazz origins appear as a sense of calm after the frantic state of the Gumbo Variations. There's a skippy nature to the melody, and the soft sax rhythm explores a commanding array of textures. The brass amalgam is, for me, a sense of wonderment. Underwood's truly astonishing mix of noise, and then the pace quickens as Frank adds a few shots of jabbing rhythm before launching into a solo that's a neat link to more keyboard arrangements. The shots of guitar are like a dessert to the main course. That is Underwood, of course, with his musical techniques. It's 5 minutes 18, but it's sad when the silence beckons. And yes, a thank you to Jean-Luc Ponty for additional violin on this track. So we've reached the conclusion and it really is a case of let's sit down and collect our senses. For those of you who are familiar with Frank Zappa, with the Mothers of Invention, you'll need to get ready for something completely different. There's no humour here apart from those few lines by Beefheart. It's pure instrumental magical playing here. He leaves everything out there, and Underwood is an amazing foil on this album. I never get sick of listening to this album. Over the years, it's just grown in my appreciation, and it really did launch me into a close look at the work of Frank Zappa, and it drew me into such other gems as Apostrophe, Overnight Sensation, and others. So I really recommend that you get your head down, get the headphones on, and listen to Hot Rats by Frank Zappa.